Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of MHQ's Foundation 101, where today we are going to compare apples and oranges and probably agree that both are excellent fruits and they can be served in symbiosis. Joining me today is Nancy Chien. Nancy, good morning.
Good morning, Jan. Hi, everybody.
Welcome on board. I'll give a little bit of your profile. I'll keep it secret for a couple of seconds. But what I'll do first is just remind why we are here. This is a foundation podcast. So when we started this little venture, we started to illustrate for people why foundations were gaining so much traction in the Middle East. And the reason for that was that trusts were not exactly known to the region in the Middle East, and foundation introduced, they really fed for a need. People could control them, could understand them, and structure their regional assets under it. So super interesting, and a lot of people wanted to educate themselves. And for that, you can, if you wish, refer to our previous webcast available here, comparing foundations and trusts. And then, of course, one would want to compare the different regimes available in the Middle East, in ADGM, DIFC, and Ras Al Khaimah. And for that, you bet, we also have a webcast that compares these. But what we really want to do is to do a cross-border comparison. And for that, we at the firm did some time ago an entire exercise of comparing all or most of the jurisdiction with foundations available. But I thought that it would be very topical to invite Nancy to discuss what is perhaps the most quintessential financial center that offers trust and foundations, and this would be Jersey and Guernsey. Jersey and Guernsey successfully introduced foundations to their regulatory framework 11 and respectively 9 years ago. These tools exist there, are used as a complement to a vast trust industry. And it is topical because the DIFC and the ADGM used some of these regulations as a basis for theirs. So I thought it would be interesting to do a segment on to these. And it's also topical because these numbers that you see are now matched by the UAE. You see here the latest numbers for the ADGM, which has about 90 foundation as of this morning. The DIFC is about to cross 100 this afternoon. So, and if you add the Ras Al Khaimah numbers, you end up with 229 foundation as of today. 60% of which have been set up since 1st of January 2020. So clearly it's on the rise, which Nancy and I thought was a good time to discuss whether one should go for a local foundation, a foreign foundation, or both in conjunction. And we're lucky to have Nancy because she actually penned a nice paper together with her award-winning team at Bedel Christin, which she leads as a private client partner, where her and her team have been comparing Middle Eastern foundation regime and the Channel Island regimes of Jersey and Guernsey. So Nancy, having conducted a comparison of these Channel Island regime and the DIFC ADGM foundations regime, do you find them very different?
Hi, Jan. Thank you very much. No, actually. And I think the reason is that when drafting the foundation laws, the ADGM and DIFC essentially cherry-picked the best components from the different jurisdictions. And so actually they incorporated a lot of features of Jersey and Guernsey foundations law into the ADGM and DIFC regulations.
Yes.
And therefore it's not surprising that we actually find a high degree of similarities, both as to form and structure of the foundations between these different jurisdictions.
Okay, and we know that the ADGM has actually, don't say copy paste, but done very much something similar to Guernsey. So what are these similarities, if you can point a couple for our audience?
Of course. So going to sort of the documentation side first. So in relation to all foundations that you find across all the different jurisdictions, you've got essentially two governing documents. You've got what's called a charter, which contains some very specific information about the foundations. And the charter is normally set out in the public domain. It's a public document, which needs to be filed with the various registries. And then secondly, the more intricate part of the foundation as to how it's administered is actually found in what's called the regulations or the bylaws. So it's called the bylaws in ADGM and DIFC. In Jersey, it's called regulations, and Guernsey, it's called the rules. But essentially, this is a very detailed document setting out how the foundation should be administered. And the most important part about this document, that it's a confidential document.
And what about the parties? Do they differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
Yeah, no. So interestingly, notwithstanding the fact that you've got different laws across the different jurisdictions, in terms of the parties, they're very, very similar. So in relation to each jurisdiction, you've got what's called a founder, and that's the person who basically puts money into the foundation, equivalent to a settlor of a trust. And then you've got the council, which is the body of persons that administers the foundations. And so normally this would be comprised of people from the family, and sometimes people also want to engage in professional advisors on their board to give them some guidance as to how to run these structures. And then you've got a person that's called a guardian, who can be appointed to oversee the actions of the council to make sure that they're doing a good job, and also to protect the interests of the beneficiaries or the purposes for which the foundations are established. And finally, you can have the beneficiaries of foundations. It's not mandatory, but for families who want to establish foundations for succession purposes, for the benefit of the families, it makes sense for their family members to be beneficiaries. So notwithstanding the fact that, there are different nuances between the different foundations laws, these are the key constituent parties that you need in order to form a foundation.
Very interesting. So if they are so similar, do you view the introduction of ADGM and DIFC Foundation as a competition to perhaps the more established Channel Island Foundation, where you actually sit?
No, that's a really interesting part, I think. I think when the laws first came out, we thought there might be a bit of competition. But actually, now having had a chance to analyze the uses of the structures in a bit more detail, I think they actually dovetail with each other really well. So, for example, the different foundations documents can be drafted so that they actually align with each other.
Yes.
And so, for example, in Jersey, we need a Jersey-based council board, but then that board can be replicated across the different jurisdictions, so that even though you've got foundations in different jurisdictions, in terms of their governance, they can operate in a very, very similar way, so as to streamline the operation for the families.
So you mentioned something about Jersey, which needs actually to have at least one qualified member. This is one of the differences that you have with ADGM, DIFC, and Guernsey, where the family members could occupy these positions. You have some other differences depending on the jurisdiction. I just thought that I would highlight a couple here. Typically, the guardian is mandatory in Jersey, is not in the other jurisdiction. You need a registered agent as mandatory in Guernsey, interestingly, but not in the others. Typically, if you have a family that has an office in ADGM or in the DIFC, it can be its own registered agent. And about 15% of the families that set up foundations so far in the Middle East have that. But Nancy, what do you see as the main difference between these two for you in practice?
Of course. So one key difference is that the ADGM and DIFC foundations can hold local real estate, and that is absolutely key. Because prior to the introduction, it was very difficult for Abu Dhabi or Dubai real estate to be held under any meaningful wealth structuring device. And so the introduction of foundations in order to hold these assets means that all of a sudden clients can actually plan for the longer term, but also the use of these foundations to hold real estate means that it opens up opportunities for overseas investors. So when they actually own property in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they don't need to apply Sharia law, which could, for some clients, be slightly daunting. But there's another key difference, and that is that the location of these foundations brings about opportunities for clients to diversify their risk as well.
Yes.
ADGM,
so geographical split, you mean, right?
Absolutely, because obviously ADGM, DIFC is based in the Middle East, while Channel Islands Foundations have their roots with their strategic locations in Europe.
So why do you consider this locational difference to be of such significance in practice?
Yeah, so for a lot of families, actually having assets in different jurisdictions will help them to spread risks. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we never know when the laws in one country will change. So for some families, it's actually very beneficial for them to hold different assets in different countries, so that if the laws of one country were to change in a way that they weren't expecting, then at least they've got other safe havens to go to in terms of their asset protection. And also legally, from an asset protection perspective, it's better in any event to have assets held in structures administered in and governed by the laws of the jurisdiction in which they're located. So where this can be achieved, it's slightly more difficult for creditors to attack the structures. So, you know, what we see is actually that for clients who have their worldwide assets, we would recommend that they use DIFC, ADGM foundations to hold their local assets, i.e. their assets in the Middle East. However, they can use Jersey and Guernsey foundations for other offshore interests.
And this is, by the way, very, very consistent with what we see, because as we know from the statistics, 80% of the wealth of regional families is in the region. So it makes sense to have something allocated to that. And then if you have, say, a portfolio in the UK, Switzerland, if you have real estate in the UK, etc., it makes perfect sense above and beyond a certain, I would say, amount of assets under management to split these and to mix them in terms of administration, what you mentioned before, right?
I totally agree with that. And also, you know, for families who might want to engage in professional service providers to assist with the administration of the foundation, actually having foundations in the DIFC, ADGM to hold their local assets means that they're able to find people who understand the local assets and businesses better to help them with those structures. And similarly, in terms of the offshore assets, the same principle applies in relation to Jersey and Guernsey.
And if you look at it from a practical standpoint, this is a file that Nancy and I have had the pleasure of working on. So what you see on your left-hand side is a foundation that has two underlying structures, one for real estate, one for an operating business, but the same family actually has a foundation in the Channel Islands holding both financial assets and real estate. And in that specific case, what was done was a guardian company that actually provided that service to both entities, so almost across as a bridge. But you could imagine something different. You could imagine Jersey Foundation or Guernsey Foundation being the guardian of a UAE foundation. This is perfectly possible. Or you could imagine the opposite. Let's take a family that has its roots in the Middle East, but that has some assets abroad. It could have a UAE foundation act as the protector to a trust or a guardian to a foundation. So as you see, these structures, like Nancy and I, can work in sync. And if you want to know more about how these structures can work together, how they compare, I draw your attention again to this excellent paper published by Bedel Christin under Nancy's leadership, which compares all these tools, all the specific. It has more technical things that I can fathom. So if you have more question on that, feel free to direct them directly to Bedel and Nancy. And for us, we will be back next week to discuss a very domestic topic. We will be talking about the UAE mainland trust law and which impact it will have in practice. In the meantime, a wholehearted thank you to you, Nancy, for joining us, and I wish you an excellent week ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jan.